biblical account of David and Goliath from the book of Samuel is perhaps one of the most popular tales from scripture. Not only does it portray one of the greatest examples of heroics from the Bible, but it is also a tale that applies in modern times to our very own lives. It shows us that despite how large adversity may be for an individual, anyone can overcome it. It serves to teach us that by having faith, though not necessarily in God but in oneself, victory can be achieved even with the odds stacked against us. The story of David and Goliath in the Bible, the tale starts with the Philistines, the army gathering their forces for war on one side of the valley. The Philistines in this tale are described as being the enemy of the biblical God, and that they worship pagan gods. Meanwhile, the Israelites had taken on the role of the servants of the biblical God. The Israelites occupy the other side of the valley as they are led under King Saul, the man said to have been the tallest in Israel. But there was a man taller than even King Saul, some say a 9-foot monster of a man who held in Gath. In the book of Samuel, he is described as wearing a bronze helmet, a coat of scale armor also made of bronze, and the javelin slung on his back. His name was Goliath, and he was as fearsome and as menacing as any 9-foot monster could be. It's understood that his presence in the valley stalled Saul's forces, for they were too struck with both fear and awe at the sheer size of this bellowing giant. The challenge from Goliath: for a whole 40 days, Goliath would march his way towards the Israeli forces and openly mock them with his booming voice, denouncing their God and exclaiming at none as formidable as he is. He would grow tired of waiting for the Israelites to make their move though, and so he would offer them an ultimatum. He told the Israelites to send a single man to face him, and in doing so it would spare the rest of the men having to face him and his army. The winner of the battle would see their side hold dominion over the other, but his words only sent more panic through the Israeli army. No longer would they be in a union when they fought Goliath, but instead a single man would have to bear the terror facing his unmitigated strength, one-on-one. Being the king, it was expected that Saul fights Goliath. After all, he was the tallest man in Israel, not so tall as Goliath, but tall enough that he was considered to be a very viable candidate. But Saul hesitated despite being adorned in his armor, would not come out to face Goliath. David learned about Goliath's insult, and so enters David into the story, a mere boy who was more suited to tending to the sheep, given that he had no extraordinary height, no rippling muscles, and certainly no reputation that would paint him as a fierce warrior, or a warrior at all, for that matter. He was the son of a man named Jesse from Bethlehem. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had all followed Saul to battle in the valley, and it was David's job, which he was tasked with by his father, to bring food and good tidings to the brothers in their time of war. On this occasion, when he was sent by his father to bring gifts to his brothers, he came across the 2 armies staring off against each other in the valley. In the effort to locate his brothers, David would overhear Goliath beckoning his usual triad of insults at the Israeli god, and would notice how the Israeli army covered in his presence. David would learn from the panic mutterings of the Israeli army that King Saul was desperate to get rid of the giant Goliath, that he would do anything for the man who was able to slay him. This included giving the man his daughter and would exempt him from paying taxes. Liking the sound of all this, it spurred David into action, and he would tell the other Israelites and his brothers of his intention to slay Goliath. While this may be interpreted as David's bravery and it his belief in himself and God that makes him so full of conviction, it can also be said that the only reason he nominates himself too readily is because of the reward being offered. In the biblical story, David only considers acting after he hears about the reward, and so his acts can be interpreted as being one of selfishness. However, most agree that David acted in accordance with God's plan, and that it's understood from previous passages that David had been chosen by God to eventually replace King Saul, whom he was unhappy with. David faces King Saul. David would be brought before King Saul to make his bold proclamation, but King Saul wasn't impressed. He didn't believe that a mere boy who had handled sheep all day was a viable fighter against a monster like Goliath, and most likely Saul's zero chance in David's success. If David lost, which he surely would have done, Saul would lose his entire kingdom to the Philistines. Furthermore, it didn't sit right with Saul to send an innocent boy into the path of Goliath, for it certainly would have been a massacre. But David was able to convince Saul to let him fight, where he tells the king of an account where he fought off a lion and a bear who had come to carry off his father's flock. David recounted that he seized the creatures by the hair, struck them and killed them all by himself. David went on to explain that he owed these victories to God and that God would see him victorious against Goliath as well. So struck by David's account, Saul agrees to let him fight and dress David in his tunic. He armed David with the finest coat of armor and an equally fine sword. But when David tried to move around, he found the armor and the sword most cumbersome. So he removed them and opted to fight Goliath without any reinforcement at all. Despite Saul's protest of this being a suicide mission, David calmly chose 5 small stones from the ground and placed them in his shepherd's bag. With a sling in hand, he paced his way out into the valley and the midst of Goliath. David and Goliath, the fight of ages. Much like Saul, Goliath wasn't very impressed with the skinny boy marching his way to meet him. In fact, Goliath was offended that such a challenger was even being presented before him. In reference to David's sling, Goliath stated, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Before he went on to curse David, telling him that he was going to feed his flesh to the animals after he was done killing him. David calmly told Goliath that he was going to lose this contest and his life intact with the power of his God. He would see to the slaying of Goliath by the removal of his head. He also stated that Goliath would pay for the crimes he has made against the Israelis people and God, and that it was his corpse that would be fed to the animals. Not standing for that insult, Goliath moved him to rush David, but to his surprise, David came rushing forward to meet him. Reaching into his bag, David was able to take out one of the stones, which he used to sling at such a speed that it sank into Goliath's forehead, knocking him to the ground. With this, the valley has hushed into silence, and all anyone could do was watch all in awe as David stood over the giant, victorious. But David wasn't quite done. He proceeded to decapitate the giant with his sword, and his savagery would see the Philistine army turn to flee. Unfortunately for them though, the Israeli army would follow and seated a second of their camps and the butchering of their troops. Israelites won the battle over the Philistines. It would be a major victory for the Israelites, given that the Philistines had been a principal enemy for them from 12,000 to 1000 BC. The Philistines were quite a threat to the Israelites as well, not just because they boasted a warrior like Goliath, but because they were skilled at working with iron and forging weapons. It would allow them to construct masterful chariots, which could be used in battle to ride down their enemies, as well as to cover large distances of terrain. However, as you can imagine, the chariots would not much be of a use in the valleys given the harshness of the rocky terrain, and so he put them at a disadvantage. It would explain why Goliath and the Philistines didn't just rush the Israelites in the 40 days of a Goliath boasting, because they were cautious that the Israelites would fare better on the landscape of the valley.
If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to us and hitting the like button. Feel free to write a comment below and suggest which theory you want to see next. If you'd like to further support this channel, please consider joining. Our membership link will be found in the description box below. We appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for watching.